Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which is an interesting book, a book collection of memoirs and views from a person many of you will know, Sir Louis Blom-Cooper, Queen's Counsel. The book he's produced is called Power of Persuasion. It's this book here, essays by a very public lawyer. We'll have a look at the book in a minute. It's come to us from HART Publishing. I attended the launch of the book at Middle Temple Hall, which was very well attended, and Lord Dyson, who's written the foreword, has given gave some very nice comments about the book itself. And of course, Louis is a very well-known person to many people and has his own views, which we'll talk about in a minute. My wife and I have looked at the book, we attended the launch, and we've given the title of the review, A Great Collection of Legal Stories. And that's what it is. I see it's got Bloomsbury down there, but actually on the back it's HART Publishing. That's the front, nice picture of Louis on the front. Then there's a quote from Lord Dyson, Master of the Rolls, on the back there. It's a hardback, and there's some nice information on the inside dust cover there. And then on the back you've got just a very small amount of information about Louis and when he was at Doughty Street Chambers. The book itself there's a nice index, which is useful, always useful to have an index. It's very much a readable book. There's a little conclusion right at the back with some of the points that he makes, talking about his life over the last 60 years at the bar. And I'm going to come on to that in a moment because he mentions a couple of people whom I'm sure you will know. And we're going to look at that. There's a little statement about the book itself, and then you've got the front there. Then you've got a foreword from Lord Dyson, who's known Louis for a long time. Then you've got the various parts which make up the book. Parts 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Parts 1 is public law, judicial and judicious review. Part 2, crime and justice. Part 3, penal affairs. Part 4, media law, and then a miscellany at the end. And then there's an introduction explaining what the book's about. Then the main part of the book, there are footnotes to actually link to some of the things that he's been involved in, and obviously quite a large number of directly relevant cases and debates in Parliament and so forth. Because Louis has had a very distinguished career to date, and is still going strong with a number of areas of importance to, I think, all of us. Now, what we say about this book is the following. I personally think it's an excellent book for anybody who's thinking of studying law, because it gives you one of many different views about the way the law has been shaped in the last 60 years, as far as Louis sees it anyway. Now, it's always a delight as counsel to read of the exploits of some of our well-known and highly respected figures in the legal world. Too often, learned legal memoirs don't shape up the way we would actually like them to or expect them to, and there can be a bit of a disappointment after the eager anticipation of a new book being published. Not so with Louis Blom-Cooper. You know where you stand with him from the outset because of his substantial contribution specifically to the area of public law. Probably a bit unfair to call him a polymath practitioner. I know that's been used, but although it's difficult to see where he would fit in if it's something as vulgar as a label which were to be, say, pinned on him. He calls himself a modern reconstructed liberal, a man before his time, and we would probably agree with that from his gracious speech at the Middle Temple Hall when he launched this collection of essays, and the other guest speakers who were present and endorsing it. What does emerge from the essays, and it's of great significance today, is the lack of proper public legal education. This should never be a party political matter, of course, because the general public doesn't know what we as the legal professionals really do, except for what they see on TV and film, both mediums getting it wrong on just about every occasion in order to produce the right storyline within a budget and time constraints. Enter Blom-Cooper, who's not afraid to speak out, as Lord Dyson remarks in his foreword when he says that Louis has always been a radical in his views and that his essays are immediately engaging, which they are to lawyer and layman alike. And this book actually could be read by a wide range of people. It's not just for lawyers. The mark of a great advocate is the communication of information in a simple and clear manner, and that is what we have with Power of Persuasion and this collection of essays. You know when you read this book that you will not agree with some of the contents, but you can recognise the eminence of the arguments which Louis puts forward. What struck us about Blom-Cooper's career in the law was that he started as a civil practitioner and moved towards public law, both crime and judicial review. For many of us, it's the other way round today. His essays contain much contemporary history of the last 60 years and will be of great interest to law students and practitioners, young and old, for its detail. There are 5 parts of the book which I showed you earlier, and they cover public law at the beginning, that's judicial and judicious review, then crime and justice, penal affairs, media law, and finally miscellany, including an interesting part on Denning as a judicial misfit, which he did mention at the launch, to be fair, which caused us mild amusement, and it's a good job the book wasn't launched at Lincoln's Inn, and rather at Middle Temple. What does stand out with these essays is the forward-thinking nature of Blom-Cooper, of the Blom-Cooper philosophy, particularly on privacy law and the serious state of affairs concerning current penal policy after his sterling work with the Howard League. We're particularly taken by the achievements of his judicial heroes, Lords Reed and Bingham. Any undergraduate today will always note the clarity of expression of Reed, which stands out in the leading judgments of his day, and the huge influence more recently of Tom Bingham, both in Louis's first 11, as he calls it, and makes me wonder, and us wonder, who would you include? The book ends quite positively. The author talks of a divided profession 60 years ago which, quote, engaged in professional dialogue only intermittently and at arm's length. Then he writes that today the picture is very different. Yes, and the final point may well yet come to fruition, whereby our literary output, which still lags behind the Americans, will change and we will narrow the gap. And yes, we would really like to see biographies of Reed, Wilberforce, Scarman and Bingham, and that day will come, I'm sure. What I have found interesting is the people that he mentions. Obviously I haven't met many of them. I did meet Lord Denning, and I've met a number of other senior judges over the last sort of 40 years, but certainly the comments he makes are particularly interesting. There's quite a lot of comment again about Lord Denning there, who is obviously a person who does actually cause a great deal of interest, certainly both in terms of the academic world and also a whole range of other areas too. The book itself, though, I think is of great importance. There's an important point about James Hanratty. Many of you will know that case. It's called a vindicatory view because of the fact that it was proved effectively beyond a doubt that Mr. Hanratty did kill the person concerned. So therefore that matter has effectively been brought to rest. As I mentioned about the conclusions, he does go a little bit about the lack of literary writers, if you like. We do have a few, but we haven't got the same number that the Americans have. And that may, of course, well change this century. So we will look forward with interest to see how it happens. I'd like to thank Bloomsbury and HART, publishing very much for this book, and to Louis, of course, for bringing all the bits together, bringing it all together and putting it in a very interesting collection. I found it fascinating to read, and I'm sure you will, because there aren't that many, but there are quite a few, and more coming, of what are legal memoirs, and this is at the forefront of them. So thank you, Louis. Good luck with all that you're doing at the moment and what you're going to be doing in the future, and this book I will treasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.